Tonight, we step through the ancient gates of the Tower of London, a fortress of stone, blood, and whispered secrets that have festered for centuries. In the dead of night, a yeoman named Thomas Bloodworth vanished from the shadowed corridors, leaving behind only a journal scrawl with frantic warnings. They watch, even the walls breathe, do not trust the stones. No body, no explanation, no escape, and yet, by morning, guards swore the journal had moved, appearing in places no one could reach. The tower called it a disappearance. The city called it impossible. And 3 centuries later, we're still hearing footsteps echo behind locked doors. A single, trembling ink blotch on yellow parchment. That's all that survived from the last journal entry of Thomas Bloodworth, a yeoman in the Tower of London, dated June 12, 1670. They watch from the stones. I hear whispers behind the bars. Even the ravens know. Nothing else. No explanation. No signature. Not even a hint of what terror had clawed into his mind. By the time anyone noticed, he was gone, vanished from the tower's infamous walls, as if swallowed whole by its own history. Imagine, if you dare, wandering the stone corridors where royalty and traitors alike have shuffled toward their doom, where echoes linger not from your own footsteps, but from centuries of screams and hushed confessions. Somewhere between the Beauchamp Tower and the Bloody Tower, Bloodworth's shadow remained, and the guards swore the corridors hummed with an unnatural draft. Like the stones themselves were whispering secrets no one was meant to know. The official report, if you can call it that, claims he simply disappeared. No struggle, no footprints, no sign of leaving. But the tower was never just a building. It's a labyrinth that remembers. Each arrow slit, each rusted hinge, each iron gate holds memory. And Bloodworth's last words, scribbled desperate, nonsensical to the untrained eye, suggested that he had stumbled onto something so malignant that even the tower itself seemed to conspire against him. And yet, some nights, they say, the guards hear it. A low, dragging shuffle, like someone pacing the walls, muttering secrets that curl into the ears and refuse to let go. Ravens circle overhead, unnaturally silent. And if you look closely, the windows reflect more than the moon. They catch glimpses of man who should not exist, watching from behind a veil of centuries. It's not just disappearance. It's an unraveling, a frayed edge of sanity torn open by the architecture of fear, secrecy, and macabre. There are no suspects, no weapons, no clues. Only the eerie residue of a life that ended in the shadow of one of England's most storied prisons. Every stone in that tower could tell a story, and yet this one refuses closure. So, let's not pretend we understand what we're stepping into. The tower has secrets older than the monarchy itself, and Bloodworth? He either uncovered one or became part of it. And tonight, for the first time in centuries, we're going to follow those whispers, trace the invisible lines of terror, and see what the tower does to a man who hears too much and lives too little. The year was 1670, a time when London's skyline was a chaotic jumble of chimneys, spires, and smoke. The Great Fire had reduced much of the city to ash just 20 years prior, leaving behind a maze of cobbled streets and narrow alleys where disease, crime, and superstition thrived. And standing above all this chaos was the Tower of London, a fortress, a palace, a prison, a mausoleum, all rolled into one grim, stone-clad contradiction. It was both sanctuary and cage, home to kings and convicts alike, with a scent of old mortar mingled with the metallic tang of blood past. The tower wasn't merely a backdrop. It was an actor. Its walls had witnessed the executions of Anne Boleyn, Lady Jane Grey, and countless others whose ambitions collided with royal wrath. Its dungeons held prisoners who had vanished without a trace, their names whispered only in court records and rumors that grew more grotesque with each retelling. Guard patrolled in uneasy silence, knowing that shadows could conceal both the living and the dead. At the same time, England was a society gripped by paranoia. The Restoration had returned Charles II to the throne, but his court was riddled with spies, conspiracies, and hidden agendas. Fear of plots, real and imagined, had seeped into every corner of life, turning neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend. Even within the tower, every footstep, every clank of iron could mean danger. Secrets were currency, and no one, not even the lowliest yeoman, was immune to the tower's inscrutable authority. And let's talk about the atmosphere. Damp, cold stone corridors that seemed to hum with the voices of the past. The air smelled of mildew and iron, a suffocating mixture that made every breath feel contaminated. Flickering torches cast long, jittering shadows, stretching shapes into grotesque parodies of humanity. Noise traveled strangely here. Whispers bounced off walls and towers, creating echoes that were impossible to localize. For a man like Thomas Bloodworth, ordinary, dutiful, yet curious, this place was less a prison and more a living organism, aware of those within, testing their minds. Even the wildlife contributed to the tower's oppressive aura. Ravens, kept for superstition and folklore, wandered freely among the ramparts. Their eyes gleamed unnaturally in torchlight, and their cries were never just cries. They sounded like warnings. Everyone knew the legend. If the ravens ever left, the tower would fall. But in 1670, no one could predict that the tower itself might consume a man long before any collapse came, or that those same birds might witness the unraveling of a mind before it disappeared entirely. This was a city of smoke, superstition, and silent dread. And at the heart of it all, the Tower of London loomed, ancient, impenetrable, and hungry for stories like Bloodworth's, stories that never ended, stories that would echo through history in whispers and shadows. Thomas Bloodworth wasn't a hero, not by any traditional measure. He wasn't a soldier, a nobleman, or a man of remarkable intellect. He was, by all accounts, a quiet, unassuming yeoman, tasked with maintenance, record-keeping, and the occasional escort of prisoners. Yet, in his mundanity lay a curious spark, a habit of noticing things others ignored, of scribbling observations in a small, leather-bound journal that smelled perpetually of damp stone and ink. Some called it obsessive, others prophetic. He had the look of someone who carried too many secrets in a lean frame. Thin wrists, pale skin from days spent in shadowed corridors, and eyes that darted at even the faintest creak of the tower's ancient beams. There are accounts, fragmentary, conflicting, of him wandering at odd hours, lingering near the Bloody Tower or the Beauchamp Tower, muttering to himself about voices in the walls. Was he hearing ghosts, or something far more sinister? His peers shrugged, laughed nervously, and moved on, but Bloodworth noted everything. Every scratch on a doorframe, every faint scorch mark in the dungeon, every whispered rumor among guards. To him, nothing was insignificant, and therein lies a terrifying contradiction. An ordinary man burdened with extraordinary perception. He noticed patterns in the tower where others saw only decay. He recorded movements, notations, and unexplained occurrences with the meticulousness of a scholar and the urgency of someone who felt the walls themselves were alive. Even his handwriting betrayed tension. Letters looped and twisted, as though the pen were straining under the weight of his fear. Friends and acquaintances described him as polite but distant, someone who could blend into the background yet vanish into thought at a moment's notice. He was not social, yet he was not isolated. The guards trusted him. Prisoners, when given a chance, whispered to him, offering scraps of information, hints of old secrets they hoped would never reach daylight. He collected these fragments, tucking them into his journal, never fully able to interpret what they meant, but instinctively sensing that the tower held truths the living were not meant to touch. Bloodworth's life before the disappearance was a fragile balance of routine and unease, a man dancing along the edge of shadow he could see but could not define, and in that precarious equilibrium, there was something almost poetic, an invisible thread tying him to the tower, a thread that would eventually pull him into the deepest darkness of its corridors. He didn't choose the path. The tower chose him, or perhaps he chose it, unknowingly, and began a journey that would unravel not only his own sanity, but also the very notion of what the tower could contain. He was not remarkable, but the tower made him remarkable or monstrous, or perhaps both. It began with a single, almost laughable incident: a missing key. Thomas Bloodworth, who prided himself on knowing every lock, every bolt, every iron hinge in the tower, reported one of the prisoner keys vanished from its hook. Nothing else had changed. The guards were distracted, the corridors quiet, but for him, it was a crack in the familiar order. He scoured the tower, retracing steps that had been memorized down to the scuff marks on the stone floors. Nothing. No misplaced key, no sign of theft, no hint of intrusion. The second event was stranger. One of the ravens, old and ragged-winged, vanished. The remaining birds grew restless, shrieking and flapping along the ramparts in unnatural circles. Bloodworth noted in his journal, describing the sound as a chorus of grief and warning that the stones themselves echo but cannot explain. He became obsessed. Every shadow, every creak, every whisper in the corridors became a clue. But the tower didn't respond to logic. It responded to fear. And Thomas felt it tightening around him, like a coil waiting for a misstep. Then came the disappearance of prisoners' personal effects, small, seemingly trivial items. A carved comb, a fragment of book, a tin cup, nothing of great value. Yet their absence ignited panic. Guards speculated about theft, others about rats. But Bloodworth observed the patterns differently. Items vanished only from specific locations, places where sunlight never reached, where torches flickered too briefly to illuminate every corner. He recorded it, trembling as he wrote, because he sensed that these were not ordinary disturbances. And then, in the middle of the night, the first human scream. Not a prisoner's, not a guard's, something else entirely. The sound ricocheted down the stone corridors, unnatural in its cadence, a mix of despair and warning. When the guards arrived, the corridor was empty. No Bloodworth, no intruder, no prisoner. Just shadows curling into the corners and a faint, almost imperceptible echo of footsteps that did not match any living man. By dawn, Bloodworth's journal had transformed. Where there were once careful notations and observations, there were now frantic sketches of corridors, arrows, cryptic symbols, and scrawled warnings. They are here, watching, waiting. His handwriting wavered like a candle flame, breaking under pressure no one else could see. And then he was gone. The tower had swallowed him, but not quietly. The missing key, the absent raven, the vanished objects. They were breadcrumbs leading to something more profound, something monstrous, or perhaps something the human mind could barely comprehend. It was as if the tower itself had decided that a man like Bloodworth, someone attuned to its secret rhythm, had glimpsed too much. And once that threshold was crossed, nothing would ever be the same. Once Thomas Bloodworth vanished, the tower didn't go silent. Oh no. It laughed in whispers, in drafts that chilled guards of bone, in the rhythmic scratching that seemed to trace the corridor's walls. Conflicting reports poured in almost immediately. One guard swore he saw a shadow pacing in the Beecham Tower long after the night should have ended. Another insisted a door had slammed shut on its own, yet the hinges bore no sign of human touch. And then the prisoners began murmuring quietly, but urgently, about a man who walks between the stones, someone or something that watches and never speaks. The accounts didn't match. Some said Bloodworth had been taken by the tower itself, a living maze feeding on the sanity of those who dared understand it. Others whispered that he had been murdered, his body concealed in some forgotten nook, as if the building wanted to erase him entirely. Yet there were strange anomalies. His journal kept appearing in different places, always open to the same frantic, half-legible passage. Sometimes, guards reported glimpsing his reflection in windows, only to find a corridor behind them empty. Letters arrived from distant relatives, frantic inquiries demanding answers. Official statements were vague, almost dismissive, as if the tower's administrators wanted the world to believe a man could vanish without consequence. But the truth was far stranger. Scholars, antiquarians, and even a few of the tower's own keepers began to note patterns in his notes, symbols recurring in the margins, strange notations beside missing objects, arrows pointing to walls that seemed unremarkable. The tower was a puzzle, and Bloodworth was the first to glimpse the corners where the pieces refused to fit. Public fascination grew, fed by rumor and rumor's own grotesque embellishments. Plays whispered of a ghostly yeoman wandering the corridors, stealing keys and tormented prisoners' belongings. Caricatures depicted a man half swallowed by stone, pen in hand, scribbling warnings to an audience of shadows. And yet, beneath the public spectacle, the mystery deepened. The tower's very structure seemed almost sentient. Doors that led nowhere, corridors that shifted subtly, staircases that appeared or disappeared depending on who climbed them. The building itself was a riddle, and Bloodworth's disappearance had illuminated the question, without offering the answer. By the end of that month, the tower had transformed in the eyes of those who worked there. Fear was no longer rumor. It was measurable, a palpable weight pressing on the shoulders of guards and visitors alike. Thomas Bloodworth was gone, yes, but his presence lingered, a residue of his fear, of his obsession, of the knowledge he had glimpsed, and maybe, just maybe, of the thing that had claimed him. The deeper they looked, the less they understood. And that, perhaps, was exactly what the tower wanted. The official investigation was a circus of contradictions. Tower officials, local magistrates, and even a handful of curious scholars arrived to comb through the corridors, the dungeons, and the arrow slits, armed with lanterns, ink, and a fragile sense of authority. And yet, for all their diligence, or perhaps because of it, they found nothing. No body, no signs of struggle, no traces of forced entry, nothing that could explain Thomas Bloodworth's disappearance. It was as if he had simply evaporated, leaving only the faint stench of candle wax and cold stone behind. Some suggested the supernatural. Of course, whispered theories circulated among the guards. The tower was cursed, some ancient spirit awakened, or worse, a living intelligence lurking within the walls themselves. One scholar went so far as to argue that Bloodworth had stumbled onto secret passages, built to conceal traitors or contraband, and had been trapped or consumed by a system no one alive could navigate. These ideas were met with polite dismissals by officials and wide-eyed nods from the more superstitious. Then there were the mundane but equally haunting explanations. Perhaps he'd been lured into a hidden dungeon, killed, and hidden by a prisoner with knowledge of the tower's secret corners. Or perhaps he'd simply been driven mad by the oppressive atmosphere, wandering until he collapsed somewhere outside the reach of the tower's patrols. Yet none of these theories accounted for the journal, which kept reappearing in places that made no sense. One night, guards found it atop a windowsill, open to the same frantic page, with ink that was somehow still wet. Even historians today struggle with the fragments. Bloodworth had noted odd carvings on walls that were either old graffiti or something coded, symbols that some modern researchers argue resemble alchemical or mystical ciphers. There are claims he documented subtle movements of shadows, even doors and staircases that shifted when no one was watching. It's maddeningly specific and maddeningly unverifiable. Was it paranoia, genius, or evidence of something that defies rational explanation? One overlooked clue: a series of minor thefts and disappearances that occurred in the tower in the weeks leading up to Bloodworth's vanishing. Items small and seemingly insignificant, nothing of high value, all disappearing from precise locations. The pattern is striking, almost deliberate, yet contemporary records treated it as coincidental. Could Bloodworth have been investigating them? Did that curiosity cost him his life or his sanity? The investigation ended as it always does in these cases: inconclusive, frustrated, and quietly swept aside. But the unanswered questions only festered. Bloodworth's disappearance was no longer just a matter of lost personnel. It had become an enduring enigma, a nexus of fear, superstition, and obsessive speculation that continues to ripple through history. Then came reports that broke the facade of reason entirely. A new night guard, inexperienced and pale as a candle flame, claimed he saw Bloodworth, alive, pacing, scribbling in the shadows near the bloody tower. He described him as pale, shaking, muttering words that made no sense but sounded like warnings. The man ran, screamed, and when senior guards arrived, the corridor was empty. as if the air itself had swallowed Bloodworth whole. Yet the journal lay there, open to the same frantic page. Even more unsettling, one of the tower's senior clerks confessed in whispers that some prisoners claimed to see Bloodworth in their cells, watching silently from the corner, sometimes leaning close to the bars, but vanishing when looked at directly. Patterns emerged that defied reason. The journal appeared in different locations each day. The walls seemed to shift subtly in the dead of night, and even seasoned guards reported hearing footsteps echoing behind locked doors. A dramatic confrontation occurred when a prominent historian tried to map the tower's floor plan against the notations in Bloodworth's journal. He discovered that certain corridors seemed not to exist, or did not exist consistently. Rooms marked in the diaries sometimes corresponded to empty stone walls. Staircases led to nowhere, and doors appeared where none were recorded. The historian nearly fainted when he realized the journal had plotted a path through the tower that changed depending on who walked it, as though the building itself were alive, a labyrinth designed to conceal more than prisoners or treasure. And then came the whispers of foul play, darker than mere disappearance. Some speculated that a high-ranking official, obsessed with secrecy, had orchestrated a removal of Bloodworth. Others argued that he had discovered an occult conspiracy embedded within the tower's architecture, something the living feared more than death itself. But no evidence ever surfaced, only more questions, and a growing sense that the tower was complicit in its own cruelty, a predator hiding in plain sight, punishing curiosity with disappearance. By the end of that month, the breakdown was not just narrative, it was psychological. Guards refused certain corridors at night. Prisoners refused to sleep near specific walls. Scholars studying the case wrote frantic letters warning that even looking too closely could draw the tower's attention. Bloodworth was no longer just missing. He had become a symbol of the tower's enigma, a man devoured by a place that could twist space, perception, and reason itself. The turning point wasn't a discovery. It was a collapse of certainty. The tower had won. Thomas Bloodworth's fate was no longer a puzzle to solve. It had become a lesson in terror, an enduring breakdown of logic that left anyone who investigated shaken, haunted, and uncertain whether they were following a man or being followed by the tower itself. The tower's official stance remained maddeningly bland. Thomas Bloodworth was presumed missing, perhaps dead, with no known cause. A few bureaucratic memos suggested he may have wandered into one of the tower's restricted areas, fallen, and perished alone. Yet no body was ever found. No one could confirm even the faintest trace of his existence after that fateful night. The investigation, such as it was, closed quietly, buried under years of administrative inertia and whispered warnings. And yet, the questions persisted. Scholars, guards, and historians alike kept returning to his journal, that tattered, desperate map of observations, symbols, and warnings. Was it madness? Was it genius? Or was it something else entirely? Something the tower itself had conspired to conceal? The inconsistencies were maddening. Doors that appeared and vanished, corridors that shifted, shadows that moved independently of light. The tower, in essence, refused resolution. Its mysteries were layered, almost tauntingly, like a puzzle designed to punish those who sought answers. Some modern theorists argue that Bloodworth stumbled upon an elaborate architectural secret, hidden passages, escape routes, or even tunnels connecting to subterranean London that no one else had mapped. Others propose something far darker, a form of psychological manipulation deliberately imposed on select yeomen or prisoners to test the boundaries of fear and obedience. There are even more fantastical claims that the tower's structure itself can bend perception, that certain nights allow the walls to shift subtly, that Thomas was caught somewhere between dimensions, trapped by a building older than memory itself. And yet, tangible answers remain elusive. No evidence corroborates the most extreme theories, and the more reasonable explanations feel hollow in the face of the tower's uncanny aura. Some guards still whisper about footsteps echoing in empty corridors, journals appearing in impossible locations, and fleeting glimpses of man, pale, trembling, pen in hand, watching from shadow corners. The legacy of the case isn't resolution, it's uncertainty. Bloodworth vanished, leaving behind only fragments, a journal, a trail of rumors, and the unsettling sense that the tower itself was a participant, not a mere setting. He became a phantom within the stones, a ghost that no one could confirm but everyone felt. In the end, the tower offered no justice, no closure, no sense of normalcy. It left only questions, questions that fester, questions that whisper, questions that insist you look over your shoulder in corridors that are far too quiet, and wonder if a man who disappeared centuries ago might still be watching. The tower did not forget Thomas Bloodworth. In the weeks after his disappearance, new guards were warned in hushed tones not to linger too long in certain corridors. Supervisors cited safety and protocol, but everyone knew it was fear disguised as procedure. Over time, his story became a whispered legend, a cautionary tale passed from one generation of tower staff to next. Curiosity kills, yes, but in this place, curiosity vanishes. Historians examining the tower's records noted an uptick in minor anomalies after Bloodworth's disappearance. Keys went missing, prisoners reported inexplicable noises, and objects shifted from place to place with no rational explanation. Some theorized that his vanishing triggered a subtle change in the tower itself, a loosening of boundaries that allowed the building's darker aspects to seep into the daily lives of its inhabitants. Others argue that the tower had always been this way, and Bloodworth was merely the first man to notice, or the first unlucky enough to be claimed. Artists, writers, and storytellers picked up the tale. In the 18th century, a pamphlet circulated describing a wandering yeoman, a man who scribbled frantically, chasing invisible horrors through stone halls. Victorian chroniclers reference him obliquely in essays about the tower's haunted reputation. Even modern paranormal investigators cite Bloodworth as evidence of something uniquely malignant lurking within the tower, a malevolent awareness embedded in stone and mortar, a place where the boundary between observer and observed collapses. Psychologically, his disappearance casts a long shadow. Guards and visitors alike have reported unease in certain parts of the tower, a creeping sense of being watched. Some historians argue this is a form of inherited anxiety, an echo of fear passed down through centuries of stories. Yet others insist it is literal. The tower remembers, and in some way, the memory of Thomas Bloodworth persists. And then there's a journal, which survived in fragments. Its pages, copied and studied, are now part of archival collections. Yet no scholar can read them without feeling a creeping vertigo, a sudden awareness that the walls themselves are closing in. Every symbol, every line, every arrow in the margin seems alive, almost conspiratorial, as though it knows the reader will never rest until the puzzle is solved. And perhaps that was always the point. The case left a legacy, not a closure, but of tension. The Tower of London became more than a historical site, more than a prison, more than a monument. It became an enigma, a living entity in the minds of those who enter it. Bloodworth's story reminds us that some places remember too well, and that some disappearances are not merely absences, but invitations to confront the unfathomable. Sometimes I wonder if Thomas Bloodworth is still there, not alive, not dead, not in any way that our limited perception can define. The tower has a way of preserving moments, of folding time like paper until yesterday, today, and centuries ago exists simultaneously. Maybe he paces those stone corridors endlessly, pen in hand, recording horrors no one else will ever see. Maybe he's become a part of the tower, indistinguishable from a mortar and iron, a ghost that isn't supernatural so much as structural, an echo that outlasts flesh and sanity. I keep returning to the idea of the journal. Imagine the obsession required to track shadows, listen to whispers, and transcribe them in ink that refuses to dry. What must it have been like to live in that constant tension, where the walls themselves might be conspiring against you, where every step might be watched by some unseen intelligence? And yet, despite everything, Bloodworth didn't flee. He didn't hide. He stayed, compelled by curiosity, by duty, or by some compulsion that modern psychology struggles to name. And here's the truly unsettling thought. What if he wasn't alone? What if others, guarded, terrified, but aware, have glimpsed the same patterns, the same anomalies, and chose to ignore them? To survive by pretending the tower was inert, indifferent, harmless? What does it mean to live inside a place that observes you as much as you observe it? A place that can erase a man without leaving a single trace. Some historians claim rational explanations, structural tricks, clever architectural design, or human foul play. But these theories crumble under scrutiny. The tower resists neat narratives. Its stone corridors twist in ways maps cannot capture. Its shadows bend in ways lanterns cannot illuminate. And the echoes, the tiny, almost imperceptible creaks, the distant, unplaceable footsteps, the journals that appear and vanish, persist, haunting anyone willing to listen. Perhaps this is the tower's ultimate lesson. Some mysteries cannot be solved. Some disappearances cannot be explained. Some men, curious, perceptive, fragile, can be consumed not by other humans, but by the very places they seek to understand. Thomas Bloodworth is gone. Yet he endures in whispers, in ink, in corridors that shift when no one is watching. And every visitor, every guard, every historian who dares walk those halls carries a fragment of his terror, his obsession, his unanswerable question. The tower keeps its secrets well. And maybe, somewhere behind a shadowed archway, Bloodworth still writes, still waits, still watches, and we, the living, are merely the newest audience for a story that refuses to end. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next case.